Welcome to Mr. History's podcast. All right, ready to dive deep into some real juicy history.
Let's do it. Always up for a good history deep dive.
Awesome. Well, strap in because today we're tackling the XYZ affair. It's a story of international intrigue, backstabbing, bribes, you name
Oh,
it.
this is a good one. I love the XYZ affair. It's got all the drama you could ask for. And it really shows how messy and complicated diplomacy can be, especially in the early days of the United States.
Right, like imagine trying to forge a nation's identity on the world stage when you're still figuring things out internally. It must have been a wild ride.
Oh, absolutely. It was a time of huge uncertainty and change. The U.S. was just finding its footing, fresh off of victory against Great Britain, but still very much vulnerable.
Okay, so let's set the scene for everyone listening. We're talking late 1790s. George Washington's just wrapped up his presidency. John Adams is in the hot seat. And relations with France, well, they're frosty, to say the least.
Yeah, Frosty's putting it mildly. See, the U.S. and France, they had this tricky relationship. On one hand, France had been a crucial ally during the Revolutionary War, but on the other hand, they were constantly at odds over maritime rights.
Maritime rights, meaning,
Basically, freedom of the seas, control of trade routes, super important stuff back then. And France, they were at war with Great Britain at the time. They were seizing American ships, accusing them of helping the British, disrupting trade, and causing a major headache for the U.S.
gotcha. So it's like, thanks for helping us win our independence, France, but now you're messing with our ships and our economy.
Pretty much. Tensions were high. The U.S. really wanted to find a peaceful solution, though, so what did they do? They sent a delegation of 3 diplomats over to France to smooth things over and hopefully negotiate a treaty.
Sounds reasonable enough.
Yeah,
Send your best guys, try to talk it out.
right.
What could go wrong?
Well, this is where the story takes a turn for the dramatic. The American delegation arrives in Paris, expecting to meet with the French foreign minister, Talleyrand. This guy was a major player in French politics, very powerful and influential.
Okay, makes sense. You send your top diplomats to meet the top guy in France. Seemed like a good starting point for some serious diplomacy.
Except instead of a warm welcome and a seat at the negotiating table, the Americans get a very different reception.
Oh, I've got a bad feeling about this.
You should. Instead of meeting Talleyrand directly, they're approached by 3 French agents who we know today simply as X, Y, and Z. And these agents, well, they lay out some pretty outrageous demands.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here. Lay it on me. What did these mysterious agents want?
First, they demanded a hefty bribe, a huge sum of money, just for the privilege of speaking with Talleyrand. And get this, on top of that bribe, they also wanted the U.S. to provide France with a large loan.
Wait, a bribe just to talk. And a loan on top of that. That's insane. It's like they weren't even trying to be subtle about it.
Exactly. It was a blatant attempt at extortion and a huge insult to the United States. Remember, this was a young nation, fiercely proud of its independence and sovereignty. They weren't about to be bullied into paying for the right to negotiate.
I can only imagine their reaction back in America when news of this got out.
Oh, it was explosive. The public was outraged. They felt their young nation had been humiliated on the world stage. Newspapers were filled with scathing editorials. Political cartoons mocked the French, and the slogan, "Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute," became a national rallying cry.
Wow, that slogan really captures the mood, doesn't it? It's like, we'll fight you, but we won't be bought. It speaks to a sense of national pride, a refusal to be pushed around.
Absolutely. And that public outcry, that sense of national indignation, had real consequences. It pushed the U.S. and France closer to war. Not a full-blown declared war, but an undeclared naval conflict that became known as the Quasi War.
So a war that's not a war, that sounds a little confusing.
I know, right? Quasi War, it sounds like something out of a history textbook. But make no mistake, this was a real conflict. From 1798 to 1800, American and French warships clashed on the high seas, primarily in the Caribbean. There were captures, skirmishes, casualties, the whole deal.
Any particular battles that stand out?
Yeah.
Something that would really give folks a sense of what this quasi-war was like.
Well, there was the capture of the French frigate L'Insurgente by the USS Constellation. This was a pretty decisive American victory, and it really boosted morale back home. It showed that the young U.S. Navy could hold its own against a major European power.
So this quasi-war, even though it wasn't officially declared, it had real impact, real consequences.
Definitely. It affected trade, it strained relations, and it definitely shaped public opinion on both sides of the Atlantic. Eventually, though, cooler heads prevailed. Diplomacy, thankfully, won out in the end.
So how did this quasi-war eventually wind down? Was there a treaty or some kind of formal agreement?
Exactly. In 1800, the two sides signed the Treaty of Mortefontaine. It formally ended hostilities and normalized relations.
Phew, crisis averted. But, the XYZ affair, it feels like it was more than just a diplomatic incident. It feels like a real turning point in early American history.
You're absolutely right. It had a ripple effect that went far beyond those few years of naval skirmishes. For one, it boosted the Federalist Party, the party of John Adams, who took a strong stance against the French demands.
So it impacted domestic politics as well.
Big time. It showed how international events could have a direct impact on the political landscape at home. But I think, even more importantly, the XYZ affair really solidified the United States' identity as an independent nation that wouldn't be pushed around. It was a defining moment. It showed that America was willing to stand up for its principles, even against powerful nations like France.
That's a powerful legacy. It makes you think, if we were citizens back then hearing about these demands, how would we react? Would we support going to war? Would we push for a different solution? It's amazing how these historical events can make us question our own values and how we see our place in the world.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of history. It's not just about dates and names. It's about understanding the forces that shaped our world and continue to shape it today.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, I think we've thoroughly explored the murky waters of the XYZ affair. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe to Mr. History's podcast for more fascinating stories from the past.
And be sure to check out the show notes for more resources and further reading on the XYZ affair. It's a fascinating episode in U.S. history, and there's so much more to explore.
We'll catch you all next time for another exciting historical adventure.
See you then.